Today, we're diving into a story from Ladakh that's, well, it's both a deeply personal tragedy and a massive political flashpoint. It's a story about a soldier, a protest, and a whole community's fight for its future.
Just let that sink in for a moment. Pakistan couldn't take his life, but our own dead. Those are the words of Stanza Namgyal. He's a retired Subedar major, a Kargil War veteran himself. And he's talking about his son, Tsewang Tharchin, who is also a soldier. A son who survived battles against foreign enemies only to lose his life in his own homeland.
So who was Tsewang Tharchin? It's so important to see him as more than just a casualty in a protest. He was a 46-year-old decorated veteran, a respected guy in his community, a husband, and a father to 4 kids. His death on September 24th, 2025, it's the tragic heart of this whole story.
To really understand what happened, you first have to understand the man. So let's take a look at the life he lived and the final, brutal moments that his family is now fighting to bring to light.
I mean, just look at this record. This isn't just a job. It's a life of sheer dedication. Tharchin served for over 20 years in the Ladakh Scouts. These are the guys who are experts in mountain warfare. He fought on the front lines in the Kargil War. He served 4, not 1, but 4 separate tours in Tsewang, which is one of the most brutal battlefields on the planet. After all that, he retired and settled down to run a garment shop in Leh. By any measure, this man was a hero.
But his family's account of his death? It's just horrifying. They're saying he wasn't just a victim of random crossfire. No, they point to baton marks on his body, claiming he was beaten before a single bullet went into his back and came out through his chest. They're calling it murder, plain and simple, and they're demanding answers. Who gave the order to shoot?
So this brings us to the big question, right? Why was a decorated veteran like Tsewang Tharchin even at a protest that turned so violent? What were thousands of people in Ladakh demanding so passionately that they were willing to risk everything?
Okay, so it really boils down to 2 core demands. First, they want full statehood for Ladakh, which became a Union territory back in 2019. And second, and maybe even more urgently, they want constitutional protection under something called the 6th Schedule.
So what is this 6th Schedule? Well, think of it like a special shield within the Indian Constitution. It gives tribal communities the power to create their own local councils to manage their own land, their resources, and their internal affairs. For the people of Ladakh, this isn't just some dusty legal provision. It's a way to protect their unique culture, their jobs, and their incredibly fragile environment from outside influence.
And this is where the political frustration really kicks in. The central government's party, the BJP, had actually promised these very protections back in 2020. So activists, led by the well-known Sonam Wangchuk, are accusing the government of breaking that promise. And that feeling of betrayal, it's what fueled this whole movement.
All of this simmering anger, this feeling of being ignored, it finally just boiled over. On September 24th, 2025, the cold desert of Ladakh witnessed a day of truly violent clashes.
So let's walk through that day. The morning began with protests getting bigger and louder. You have to remember, hunger strikes had already been going on for weeks. By mid-morning, the situation turned ugly. According to the government, a mob attacked a political party office and set a police vehicle on fire. That's when security forces moved in to confront them, and eventually, they opened fire.
The human toll of that day was just awful. 4 civilians, including Tsewang Tharchin, were killed. And on the other side, more than 30 police and paramilitary members were injured. And, as often happens in these situations, in the aftermath, 2 completely different stories about what happened began to emerge. So, on one hand, you have the government's official line. The police fired in self-defense against an unruly mob that was incited by Sonam Wangchuk. But then, you have the protesters and activists, who say the violence was an explosion of built-up frustration, made worse when elderly hunger strikers got sick. And right in the middle of these 2 narratives, you have the family's very specific, and very disturbing, claim about how Tharchin died.
So in the immediate aftermath of the violence, the state's response was swift and it was decisive. This led to a wave of detentions and the start of a couple of formal inquiries.
Immediately, prohibitory orders were slapped across Leh. Just 2 days later, the face of the movement, Sonam Wangchuk, was detained. And get this, he was charged under the National Security Act, the NSA. This is a really tough law that lets the government detain someone for up to a year without filing formal charges or even allowing a trial. He was then moved to a jail far away in Rajasthan. His wife is now fighting that detention in the Supreme Court.
So why use such a serious law? Well, the government's official reason, which they submitted to the Supreme Court, is that Wangchuk's activities, including what they called provocative speeches, were a threat to the security of the state and to public order.
To investigate the violence itself, 2 separate probes have now been ordered. First, the local Ladakh administration kicked off a magisterial inquiry. After that, the Ministry of Home Affairs announced a much bigger judicial inquiry led by a retired Supreme Court judge. But the protest leaders have drawn a line in the sand. They've made it clear there will be no talks until Sonam Wangchuk and all the other detainees are released.
And you know, all of this, it brings us right back to where we started. Back to the deeply painful irony at the very heart of Tsewang Tharchin's story.
This quote from Tharchin's brother, it just says it all, doesn't it? For decades, the people of Ladakh have been some of the most loyal supporters of the Indian Army, serving as soldiers, as porters, as guides. So for them to be called anti-national just for demanding their constitutional rights, it feels like a profound betrayal.
And so we're left with this question. Tsewang Tharchin was a patriot. He fought for his country. He died protesting for what he believed were the rights of his people. His death on the streets of Leh forces us all to ask a really difficult question about democracy itself. Where exactly is the line between dissent and disloyalty? And more importantly, who gets to draw it?